We're back.
Hi, everybody.
Go ahead. Why don't you start?
Well, we wanted to respond to, this is a tender and some quarters controversial or controversial-ish topic. So we thought it would be helpful to respond to some of the classic critiques, concerns, questions, and do so in a way that really honors that it's important to be asking critical questions. That's part of discernment. And I think there are ways to, in a healthy way, honor them, but also respond in some ways that there's something important here to explore as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in particular with the topic of BDSM, what I find a lot of the time when I kind of volley it into conversations is you almost see people kind of and like lean back. And I actually spoke about it at an event once, and it was an interesting experience because like people got up and maybe they were just going to the bathroom, but I was like, are they leaving because of my subject matter? And I gotta admit, like, I didn't think that I would be somebody that would gravitate to talking about it, let alone exploring it. But the more that I do, the more I realize how much power and um, repression is showing up in our societies in this expression that I often say is like, oh, that's that energy coming out sideways, you know, because of the repression, it's not being addressed. And then it stays and it circles, and we have these patterns in our relationship that could be easily addressed and alchemized. And and that's what we're attempting to do in this membership is to create a space for that to be safe to do. But it feels really good to just kind of address here's the most common critiques that people have for BDSM and just address them from right from the jump.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And there's critiques of polarity generally. A lot of them overlap, and then specifically when there's power dynamics involved in the polarity, for sure.
totally. I had personal kind
Yeah.
of polarity issues for quite a while until I started to understand that that was some of my repression. So one of the kind of like first and most common critiques is that BDSM is associated with a pathology, that it's rooted in trauma, abuse, or mental illness in some way. Because historically, it's been classified by psychiatrists as a disorder. However, that's changed. It's no longer considered a paraphilia. It was for a very long time, and that's been shifting. Um, Moral condemnation is another topic, that it's immoral or perverse or denigrating in some way, and that it's often tied to religious or conservative value systems. And that kind of makes me smirk a little bit, like as if we're not in a system of denigration and religious and conservative value systems influencing the world in some way. And so, yeah, what kind of comes to mind for you?
Well, so all the various critiques, I think, in one form or another, and they come at it from different angles. And as we'll see, there's pretty interesting, like strange political allies, like the old is like politics makes strange bedfellows, or in this case, not bedfellows, I guess, as it were. Um, but whether they're coming from what are traditionally considered like politically the right or politically the left, they tend to zero in on the idea that it's normalizing uh, destructive and dehumanizing relationships,
Yeah.
dynamics. That I think really gets to the heart of it. It could be framed this way, that way, the other way, because it's religious or because it's if it's a man, a woman, and the woman is submissive and the man's dominant, that's a return to, caveman or the patriarchy or whatever. Like, so at the heart of all those critiques, I think is something really important, which is how do we actually work with power? And what is unconscious power? What is power that is in fact destructive? What are the hallmarks of it? What are the qualities of it? And what are forms of power that are conscious? And if I would put it in the unconscious category, it's power that is expressed non-consensually, and it's about one or another taking from another, and it leads to experiences of people feeling used, fundamentally disrespected, unloved, uncared for, ostracized, marginalized, muted, voiceless, whatever. And if we think about that, we don't need to, as you were saying, start with BDSM or kink world or polarity world or conscious sexuality world or tantra or any of it. We just need to look at the news. Like literally everywhere is dehumanizing and really disgusting forms of destructive power, power being wielded in a non-consensual, not mutually flourishing, destructive manner. Politics, obviously, corporate dynamics. Talk to anybody who has a big corporate job and they'll, all the classic stories of we've got the art company has the little thing on the wall that tells you how we treat our employees and how we treat our customers. Then you actually ask the employees, I don't do that at all. Like I'll tell you what it's really like. Institutions, uh, educational, medical, health, bureaucratic, they're dehumanized, really anonymous forms of bureaucratic power that are just people are just numbers and they're just played in a system.
Yeah, I see it. The most I see it really has to do with, just because of my background, has so much to do with health. And so often what I see in the wielding of it in healthcare is the sort of this like that person, that physician, that practitioner that's in charge ultimately because they have the information. They know my body better than I do because they have the science. And in that science, I just trust that they can be responsible for my well-being. And then, somewhere down the line, an opportunity arises where it's like, well, actually that vaccine didn't go so well, or that surgery was, it was done on the wrong side of my body, or just like there's, people make mistakes. And I always find it so fascinating how quickly people give away their power to somebody in a white coat or with a PhD behind their name. And the thing that fascinates me is that this is something that we can kind of play with and get artful with and actually build our own capacity to not go into freeze or to shut down with somebody that does have authority because we're practicing holding internal authority. And so much of this work from the empowered submission view is this participation in internal authority always being prioritized. And there's elements of nuances and there's elements of, what does that actually look like in application? And we'll discuss that more in the membership. But, in this place of the kind of moral concerns of it, what I would argue is unconscious to conscious. Unconscious is the society is already operating and so unconsciously in many of these realms that we don't properly interact with the power that we have. And instead, if we play with the power being something that we're able to wield and paint with and participate in from a space of agency, then we just get more and more robust at doing that at moments in our outer life where it can be really pinnacle to our own safety.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it shows up a lot in the alternative healing world. It's not just the mainstream.
totally.
It's just as prevalent, or certainly in mainstream religion, but also in whatever people on a kind of they say they're spiritual but not religious, and there's still a lot of imposed conformity, or this is the one teaching or the one person or the someone has the final answer. So whether it's I have friends who are doctors, and um med school is really from my experience of them sharing stories is like it was like training their humanity out of them. in order to become this other character who can be neutral and objective and
Yeah.
rational and cool under pressure or whatever. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the same kind of training a Marine goes through, or, you know, so there's all these forms of entrainment religiously or military or any in these institutional systems where the institution is there to turn people into, mold them into the institutional's vision of what they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And then in the whole realm of sexuality, intimacy, even intimate friendship, not just even only sexual intimacy, but certainly including that and partnership, it's everywhere there too.
Hmm.
So it's really easy to create some one little group of people who are outside the norm and are the supposed freaks, and we can call them all the bad names and we can scapegoat and put all the bad stuff onto them.
Yeah.
And then meanwhile, it's like, well, what about the so-called mainstream or the collective expression, which clearly is not healthy?
And yeah, like this shows up for and so much of our work is this place where do you have a strong inner authority, or are you inadvertently giving your power away because you were conditioned to do so? And then it's like, but I don't want to, but I have to, right? Like that victim kind of story of like, well, they have all the money or they have all the control. And it's like, yeah, we are conditioned to give up pretty quickly on stuff. And then when there's this opportunity to like look at like, what is it like to hold power? Just the responsibility of holding power and doing it in a way that is empowering to all people. So I think that's kind of the funny part is sort of this assumption of like one person has power and then everybody doesn't. It's like, no, might be a quick kind of assumption.
Yeah, so we'll often hear language of there's, and again, this is where I really have a lot of empathy and sympathy for people's perspective, and I understand where it comes from,
Yeah,
even though I think there's a missing element where they'll say, well, the only options are it's either power over or it's power with.
right.
Those are the only two options. And power over in that setup is inherently bad, and power with is the good. And obviously, given that whatever it is, 90, 95, 99 plus percent of what is experienced in terms of polarity with power is probably mostly unconscious and really it's quite prevalent and harmful. There's no doubt about it. So I can appreciate and sympathize the move to say, okay, all power has to be power with. We can't have any
You know,
polarities. We can't have any of that kind of play because it's all bad and it's all wrong. See all the stuff that happens, hear all the terrible stories that people have experienced of harm, and those are all real again. And um, the idea of power with then is inspiring or creates a nice kind of all positive wash of experiences compared to the alternative, which is it'll just be peachy keen and everything will be perfect.
yeah,
And then it turns out there's still there's a lot of good there. It's much better in most regards than certainly an unconscious power over dynamic, but there's still something missing. It tends to get a little flat.
yeah.
And so that's how people become interested in the possibility of re-embracing polarity type dynamics. And is there a way to do it that would be conscious and empowering versus unconscious and disempowering?
So maybe we should talk a little bit about polarity, just in like a super kind of basic sense of, you know, breaking down. We got polarized, like one side is positive, one side is negative, or one side is light, or one side is dark, and that consciously occupying those energies can be really artful and fun.
And there's many variations of how we can do it exactly, and one of which is to be one be a witnesser and one to be witnessed or beheld.
Mhm.
And so this creates a different possibility right away that kind of shoots the gap so all the critiques of the unconscious forms, particularly around BDSM, where it would be saying like, well, it's again returning to the patriarchy, or it's inherently normalizing submission of women, and it's therefore regressive, and we're going backwards, and it leaves certain women who may be drawn to this with like feelings of like, oh my God, I'm betraying the sisterhood, and
Yeah.
they fought, and so I could not, so I could, just go back to the old way. But
How dare I?
how do right? That's one. That's a real one. I've heard that.
Yeah.
Um, but if we say, hey, here's a way to think of polarity, a witness and one being beheld, it all of a sudden opens up something that none of those other critiques offer you the positive alternative. And that's the taboo thing. That's where we're always looking like for where's the taboo little hidden secret?
Yeah.
Where's the light in the shadow? So if it's a traditional religious thing, yeah, they could be under the guise of protecting the women. They can, call people all kinds of names of sinful and whatever. But those traditional religious people aren't interested in the liberation of female sexuality at all.
Yeah.
So it creates a nice cover story for them
Yeah.
to be against the freaks or the bad people who are doing the bad stuff over there, to not have to face the fact that their system is inherently predicated on trying to control female sexuality.
Yeah.
So right away, what you see is it's one thing to critique the negative. Do you see somebody offer the alternative, transformed, liberated state?
Yeah.
And to me, that's when I start to pay attention versus when I go, well, yeah, let's critique the negative for sure. But if we just stop there, then what? And it's just become more repression. So in alchemy or polarity, there's repression on one side, there's unconscious expression on another, and then there's the third option, which is conscious embodied expression. And so when it comes to, say, power, the repressed version is we should all be nice and we're all be empathetic, and it's, whenever I hear some like left-wing person say, I just speak truth to power, my response to which is, so you're always saying that the power is outside of you because you can only speak to power, which means you're inherently dissociated and disempowered, right? Just so we're clear. Doesn't give me a lot of positive responses, but it is a question like, hey, I just had this thought. Like, if you're only ever speaking truth to power, doesn't that mean you don't ever have the power?
Yeah.
Um, so we can make power so bad and evil and wrong that only they have it. And then we can be righteous in our position of being innocent and pure by never having to have power. We can just critique and, sling arrows or whatever at those who are not doing a great job. And instead, we could say, well, shouldn't we be learning how to consciously wield and exercise power?
Mhm. Yeah, great. Like I'm just looking at kind of power in families, and a great example of this is a parent should have the power over the younger child because they have more knowledge and life experience of how to do things that keep the body safe. They keep you in a space where you're thriving. They keep you kind of optimal. So the parents have the power, ideally. And then there's a harmony that comes out of that when it's understood. Or another way of looking at power in that sort of dynamic could be also an alpha dog or an alpha leader in a pack, that because they're holding the space of that, the other pack members can relax. And that's, I think, the often the missed kind of part is that we have this society that has this idea that the leader is the one that has the most fun or has the most capacity or has the most intelligence or has the most money or has like kind of put it whatever your sort of assumption is, that it's a lot of responsibility to be in that position. And for the people that have agreed to support that, there can be a lot of relief in of the direction that's going. Right? So I get to relax because you're the one that's responsible for making the decisions. So in parenting, this is a really easy kind of thing to see the benefit of it. We can really see when a toddler starts to have more power. You can really see that sort of static and how it shows up. I think the other thing, and we touched on it, I'd like to come back to it, is, the feminist sort of critique against it is like, oh, we're going backwards into a patriarchal inequity. And if we play in this realm, or if we say that we maybe are interested in it or that we like it, that in some way that is an abandonment for all of the freedom and liberties that feminine supportive people have worked so hard for. And I always thought it was sort of this funny thing because I felt strongly in that direction. But then I had this kind of realization of like, well, wait, it's not like if I decide to have an experience of being in submission that I am saying that I'm going to be in submission for the whole rest of my life. Right? It's sort of this like this fear that kind of shows up of like, what if it feels good to relax? Oh no, I might only ever want to relax again and I'll never want to do anything. And it's absurd, but it does show up a lot where this kind of complaint is, but if you act in submission, then what does that say about you, or what does that mean? And I'm like, it doesn't mean or say anything. It's an opportunity to try what it feels like to be led. And that doesn't mean I'm only ever going to make somebody else in charge of me. But this logic does show up a lot.
And I think this is exactly where, when we talk about, then why would we teach this kind of stuff? All the points that are there of like, when would someone actually entrust some of their power to be led? What would be the qualities in another person that would indicate that they are trustworthy and capable of handling such entrustment?
Mhm.
How does one go about that in such a way that it feels safe for them?
Yeah.
Can they say stop at any point? If so, like, can they feel that in their body? Like, all of these things now open up as the actual conscious exploration of what embodied power and submission looks like. That again is never going to come from people who are on the sidelines just critiquing the negative.
Yeah.
Again, those critiques can all be very valid with their partial truths, but that doesn't mean they're going to then take you on a yoga. Okay, well, if we see all these dehumanizing, destructive forms of power, does that mean we should just be against power? Or is power inherently a neutral thing and you could either use it for good or for destruction? And just repressing the tendency towards destruction is not going to cultivate the healthy, conscious, masterful wielding of it.
Yeah.
In fact, it's more likely than not to just stamp it down, stamp it down, stamp it down. And then, as you said at the beginning, it's going to come out sideways. So it's going to go from the yo-yo is just going to swing from repression to unconscious, shadowy, sideways, covert expression. Unless we learn to master this area of our lives, because it is inherent to our human experience, then it's going to master us.
Yeah.
And that's not the recommended way.
Well, and I think that's what happens is it actually is mastering us in many occasions. Like, what was the book you and I were talking about that you recommended? The one that the woman wrote about the inner patriarchy of a woman?
Yeah, the Shadow King
Yeah.
book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sidra Stone. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk just like briefly on like what she was teaching?
That she was mostly working with, she's one of the co-founders of the voice dialogue movement. And this idea that there was an inner voice essentially of the internalized patriarch within women. And and even the way that it can covertly show up, for example, in people who are critiquing patriarchy. So they might call themselves feminists, they might not, but like I see it a lot when I see they can be women, they can be men, but kind of going like, oh, are the men having a cry now? Oh, it's so hard being like that kind of like, oh, let me cry some crocodile tears for you. And just to like notice that, like, where did that voice come from? And that's the exact same kind of voice boys and men will hear growing up of like man code, boy code stuff of like, don't you show any tears or we'll attack you and you'll be weak.
Yeah.
And then so when it's coming from what's supposedly a progressive, caring, empathetic, on the right side of history, fighting the good fight, whatever the good fight is, position, you go, wait a minute, because that reminds me of that old voice that patriarchally entrains boys and men to not have feelings again, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so there's all these ways that this kind of inner patriarch energy, if you want to call it that, unless it's made conscious, is having this kind of unconscious dynamic. And one of the ways it can be transformed into a conscious ally versus an unconscious one is to learn how to contain your own power.
Yeah.
That's how it flips from a negative covert hold
Mhm.
to a conscious ally, is it actually switches to like, I have my own power. And it's not rooted anymore in stories of women are defective or boys need or men need to be a certain way in order to be real men or any of that nonsense. Like that all can be cut out.
Yeah.
And instead it becomes like, oh, I can like sit in my own seat of authority, as you were saying earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, and much like Stan Tacken talks about, like every relationship has harmony, disharmony, and repair. There's also this kind of important teaching that is a part of this program, which is you first have to have the power and recognize that you are empowered in order to choose to empower somebody else, in order to go into submission. You have to have the power to give the power away to somebody else first, and then you get to take it back again. That there's a movement in this direction in that way, and that those are both recognized as like it's power on either end of submission.
And the space in between there, why? The like why would even if someone did have their own back and they develop their own inner authority enough and they feel a healthy sense of autonomy, again, how would entrusting temporarily one's normal sense of, say, self-tracking or self-responsibility or self-agency or power, how would that not just be regressing back to codependency and enmeshment?
Mm-hmm.
Is this possibility that doing so, if it's well done on in a consensual, safe, slowed down way, the person who's submitting or surrendering, who's entrusting their power for a time to someone else and they're inside someone else's bubble, they can actually go into themselves in a way that is harder to do on one's own. And in that going in, they may get the real deep experience of coming home. And if the other person is holding them, particularly they're holding them with a lot of love, a lot of real deep devotional care and love, they will feel loved and held in a different way.
Yeah.
And there can be a different experience of co-regulation. And that person can come back into a state of their coherence and their coalesced sense of their home and being seen
Yeah.
and being loved and being held and being pervaded by somebody else,
Yeah.
conscious attention. And that's not what people normally think of when they think of BDSM.
Yeah, I think actually that's kind of the thing that I've seen so much in coaching women is sort of this fear of going inward and this fear of coming to submission. You see this a lot in relationships where there's a lot of interference or static, is like it's because both parties are trying to play the role of leader, and then you get static. You do.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
There's
Yeah.
too many cooks in the kitchen. It's not that one's bad or wrong, and we're not saying that that's anything wrong with that, but try putting one on one camp and one on the other camp, and then actually staying loyal to the camp that you're in. And that's the yoga you were speaking to, is like to really stay in a devotional state of inward. It is not the easier route. Not. It's worth it. It's, I always say subs have more fun, but to get to that space, you will meet all of the places and objections that the deeper part of you that wants to be felt is afraid to go to, and the vulnerabilities, and then all of those protector parts right above it, that actually gets to get renegotiated in a really healthy way, in a lasting, transformative way. And I've never found another technique or tool that was more effective in this to repattern early relational childhood traumas and patterns. So that's why I'm so drawn to it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then understanding the nervous system and sort of elements of how the nervous system can move through transformation and change, and how stimulation of the nervous system actually starts to break these parts up of the body, of states of freeze or elements of the body that are just offline altogether. We have a lot of dissociation of our physical experience. And so spanking or impact play, or elements that are like, most often described as the violent side, like the domestic violence or the coercion concern. Some of the elements are critiques around safe practice, that, parts of it could be abusive, manipulative, predatory, concerns around injury, physical damage, elements of that. It's great. Let's talk about it. But that's kind of, I think the thing that was really shocking to me is, like, if I let somebody spank me, then that brings up sort of a number of things. It reminds me of my childhood. Was kind of the first thing, was like, I grew up in an era where we did get spanked. And we were talking about this briefly just before we jumped on, which is this, experience for me where I was in trouble and I didn't feel loved and cared for in that experience. I felt rejected in that experience and then harmed at a very young age. But that was like standard parenting in the 80s. That's what everybody did. You weren't listening, I'll get the belt, I'll get the spoons, or you get your butt slapped. To have that experience and to go through that experience of stimulation on a part of the area with spanking that brings circulation there, that brings sensation there, that brings somatic aliveness back in, and then is met with secure attachment, and is met with safety, and is met with, even in this experience of vulnerability, you are deeply loved. It transformed a lot of that somatic fascial trauma that I had into something that was essentially an experience of bliss or ecstasy. We'll speak a little bit more about that. But this is an area of somatic work that is in like a big layer of development. It's becoming more and more prominent for people to be working in this somatic dominatrix realm. It's quite fascinating. So I think, to speak to the physical harm and the risk of abuse part, it really has a lot to do with, do you understand that this is negotiated? It's clearly consented on. You're the one driving the ship when you are in a dynamic like this. And that is an empowered place. It's not like somebody's just like, uh-oh, you turned around and I'm going to whip you.
Yeah,
I don't know what people's mind goes to, but like, it's sort of,
which is sadly the experience of, how many people get, how many stories are there of people, I don't know, waiting staff who somebody's grabbing their butt or
right,
slapping them, when
right.
they didn't ask for that. That's
Yeah,
not
completely
okay.
inappropriate. Yeah,
Um, or whatever, it's people on a crowded subway and somebody
yeah,
uses that as an excuse to like rub up on somebody's leg, or like
yeah,
there's just all kinds of really, yeah, really non-consensual. And again, this is not like, oh, it's like super extra heightened in the BDSM world as compared to what?
yeah,
People who are, meeting up on dates online and like, like come on. Like um the huge part of it is again to emphasize the cultivation of discernment. What are the qualities of a person so that somebody would maybe trust that way?
yeah,
They need to be like really safe. They really need to listen. They really need to show that they care. They really need to show that they don't have an agenda and they're not going to like, well, I want this, so I'm going to That's people's version of dominance. That's what everybody sees on TV. That's what everybody's
Yeah,
used to from politics and everything is I want this and I conquered and I took it and
yeah,
and obviously that's destructive. That's not consensual. So to start from a place of saying, if you, of all the people to me who can smell like a mile away or a kilometer away, depending on where you're listening from, uh, somebody being destructive and looking to be coercive and manipulative in their power, it's someone who's had the experience of, as you just said, like being held
mhm,
through a place of the vulnerability of allowing their power to be held by somebody else and for them to surrender and consciously, willingly, in a consensual, empowered way that's slowed down and safe for them, like get that experience in a positive way,
yeah,
then they will know in their bones this is not okay.
yeah,
They'll smell it right away.
yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
The kind of social and political concerns that it normalizes violence. So that was
Yeah, because we know that BDSM is the main thing and the only thing in society is
the only violence that we
normalizing
have.
violence.
Yeah,
Not
we don't see it in any of our movies or video
every video
games
game,
or the
every political
news
person,
or
every
invading
war,
countries.
glorifying war, glorifying death. Yeah, no, that's nowhere. I don't see any of that
Yeah,
anywhere.
yeah, yeah,
So this is again, we can always like put onto the one like freak group.
yeah,
We can always just like throw and scapegoat all of the collective sins and then everybody feels self-righteous and then be completely blind
yeah,
to the obvious ways that there's all kinds of really awful, destructive. Again, you don't need to go into kink or polarity work or tantra or any of that to find it. You just read the newspaper, turn on the news,
yeah,
go online. You'll see it everywhere.
yeah,
But we've been told not to see it because obviously those who have invested power in the current structure system who are benefiting from extractive and manipulative and non-consensual forms of theft,
mhm,
they're not going to want everybody to go, oh, hey, wait a minute. You mean this whole pyramid system? This pharaoh guy on top, and we're all
yeah,
building the pyramid. Yeah, that's a pyramid scheme. That's why it's called that. Like, that's not okay. That's not an okay setup.
mhm,
So to really get at how deep, as you were saying earlier, the conditioning is really starting to pull it up from the roots because it's everywhere.
yeah,
It's everywhere in people, what people call their friendships. I've been working with people for years and they say, my friend said this, my friend said that, and they did this to me. I was like, what kind of friend is that? It's just my last name is like, that's a friend? That sounds like an
yeah,
enemy.
yeah,
Like, what is that? That doesn't
yeah,
sound like a friend at all to me. And they go, what do you mean? Like, I wouldn't treat my worst enemy that way. Why would I treat a friend that way? And sadly, I think lots of folks have been really conditioned and entrained to not care about themselves and not believe that they matter and not believe that they can advocate for themselves and that their needs matter
yeah,
and that boundaries matter and their yeses matter and their nos matter and their bodies matter, their matter matters, like they actually matter.
yeah,
For all of the critiques of kink and things that are out there of various kinds, it's one thing to be against the negative, but is that just a cover story so people can feel self-righteous, or do they actually care about, okay, what's the liberation of that individual look like then?
mhm, yeah.
And that's where I see a lot of it falling down.
I think the other kind of part that is like the quick assumption is that the dom is a man and the sub is a woman. And
That's not always true.
that is definitely not always true. That is definitely not always true. And anytime I've heard anyone that's playing the role of submission or follower, or that place where there's a critical attack kind of on the leader in whatever way, but we'll just use this example. Try playing that role. Try becoming the dominant one and being responsible for somebody's experience. And then you really start to get the necessity of like the amount of care that's involved in that and the amount of attention that's involved in that. And it can be really transformative. And so I've always said I enjoy practicing submission because it makes me a better leader. It helps me to understand what it is that I'm leading and how to do it
Yeah.
really clearly.
And what it is to actually get real consent from other people. Yes, please show me this. I would
Yeah.
really love for you to teach me this thing. Please, you have my attention now. Like, please, tell me about this thing you studied. I really want to learn.
Right.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Versus, I've got the title, as you're saying earlier, I've got the certification.
Yeah.
I got letters after my name, so I'm entitled.
Yeah.
It's like, no, to actually really, I mean, I did a lot of public speaking, in my time. Was like, I could tell when they were listening and when they're not listening. If they're not listening, I could be saying the greatest. If I don't energetically have them, if I don't emotionally, if they don't feel connected to me, then who cares? I could be saying the greatest thing in the history of the world.
Mhm.
It wouldn't matter. It's going in one ear and it's going out the other one.
Yeah.
And that level of attunement, as you were saying, like in terms of what will be leading for those who are more drawn to the Dom side, to the yang or the leader kind of energy, if you want to call it that. It's a profound amount about actually space holding
Mhm.
and attuning and deep listening and adoring and being a safe, clear presence who can actually fly the plane and land it safely. And that, even if somebody doesn't want to take it sexually or sensually or erotically, like that's just actually great training for human beings to have a conscious orientation to their own capacity to like actually hold space and actually allow a person to have something and care for them and hold them through it.
Yeah. Yeah, that all-time common complaint of women where they're seeking presence. It's like I'm seeking a man to be fully present, not on his phone, not distracted with, thoughts of the day or what's next or anything else, but like deeply attuning to me with your full presence, and how much manipulation, coercion happens from yin or submission when it doesn't realize how to wield its own power of magnetism, and that what its own, like the simplicity of what it's seeking is presence. Yeah.
Yeah. And your point about the Dom can be a straight woman and the so it can be a straight man. It's a dominatrix.
Oh,
And
I love talking about like the benefits of submission, and then how many men are like, "Oh, I think I actually want to be in submission." And just kind of how like confusing that can be to recognize like, "Oh, what I'm looking for is the opportunity to fully go into myself and to have this experience and not need to worry about that, what that means to anything, to the
and
world,
to somebody to hold them through it
and have
and
somebody hold them." Yeah.
then love them and
Yeah.
be strong and clear and powerful and
Yeah.
loving. Yeah.
In particular, if you needed to grow up too quickly, or it was for whatever reason you were put in a responsibility of caretaking your parents' emotions, it's not uncommon to have a deep longing for this experience, because parts of your childhood where you would have been able to be met with a parent being fully present with you, when that wasn't available, we're always still kind of subconsciously seeking it. And it can show up in these ways of self-sabotaging.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I also feel like this is a great opportunity to share a little bit more about the power of yin ecstasy, or this kind of
Mm-hmm.
under maybe expressed potentiality of what's available when you are able to turn your gaze fully inward. Do you want to share your side of it?
Mm, thank you. Yeah, I think of it as power and vulnerability. And the normal way people would slice and dice that, and you'll see that in all the critiques, you'll hear it, is that the Dom has the power and the sub is all vulnerable. And it misses that there's a vulnerability for the Dom and there's a power for the sub. Those are the hidden parts of the play that, unless somebody's really done this well, they're not going to maybe know that that's a thing. The vulnerability for the Dom, like you just named, is with great power comes great responsibility. It requires an extreme amount of ethics, care, and to actually like, to flying the plane, you got to fly the plane.
Yeah.
The other person's going to go inward, and someone else is actually that person. It's going to be a Dom. It's going to hold the space. They got to do it. They got to know the phases of what it's going to look like for the journey of that person to go inward. They need to know what it's like to attune to that person's experience. They need to know that if they go deeply enough, their usual verbal capacities are going offline, very likely, which means that all forms of consent at that point are inherently based on body signals and being able to read things like sounds or moans or ways that the body moves or breathing patterns. Like this is subtle, refined, as you said earlier, artistry.
Mhm.
So that is a vulnerability slash responsibility of claiming that kind of power that might be entrusted
Yeah.
for a dom. Power for a sub, the hidden power that is part of like how it can be empowered submission or can be unlocked if it's done well is, as you said earlier, they become radically magnetic and they say, this is what I want. And then they get a bunch of like hands go up. Like there's something very powerful about, there's a power to transform us that you named earlier that's only possible in surrender, in ecstatic surrender.
Yeah.
And most people's experience or thought about ecstasy, if they think about it at all, is that they have to take some kind of substance and they go,
Yeah.
or maybe they meditate in a cave or something and they're going to leave the human experience. And their ecstasy is in some other world other than this one. And these kinds of experiences with the tantric element here is like the actual ecstasy is found inside the sub's body of desire. They need someone else to hold the space and to love them and to be safe and powerful and clear so that they can go inward. And as they do, as you said, they have to face all the things that are there. But should they do so, they will find their innocence. They will find a depth of their own purity. And that is an immense power. And that's why they shine and that's why they radiate when it's done well.
Mhm.
It's a vulnerable power. It's a very visceral power for sure,
Yeah.
but it's very real.
Mhm. I know.
And that's totally missed by all those critiques of it's inherently destructive and it's
Yeah.
inherently this, it's inherently pathological, it's perverse, it's a whatever. Like you'll never hear any of them say, well, actually, you know what? There is this whole thing where the sub can experience their own deep, innate innocence and purity.
Yeah.
Whoops, wait,
In very
what?
small print.
Oh, by the way, just a little side comment.
Yeah.
There's also this other thing that can happen too. Wait, what?
And that deep innocence and purity might also have really big, strong emotions and
Yes.
charges that come out that the body is seeking to clarify and move through, and it maybe hasn't been safe to do so for a very long time. And then when that vulnerability becomes safe, elements of rage, elements of somatic stored trauma can be expressed with a strong dominant energy that is capable of holding that, then everything becomes a green light. And so it becomes this clarification of the vessel for And that's really the innocence is on the other side of that. That's kind of what pushes it through. But it maybe was never safe to have that experience before, and then now it's able to move. It's able to become fluid and liquid again, which is the feminine experience. That's the Shakti as it moves through the body.
And that brings immense lucidity and power to someone's being outside of including, but also permeates outside of, as it were, the bedroom or that specific kind of
Yeah.
context. And again, this is back to the point of you were saying it's like the more conscious someone can enter and move through in a powerful way submission, outside of that, they're not a person to be messed with.
They are not. And they're so centered and still in themselves. It's not like a big kind of boisterous peacocking energy. It's like a deep knowing that like rocks a room when they walk in because it's communicated through the nervous system.
It also happens to be very alluring, but
It has that benefit too.
it's a
We're not
plus.
selling that part. That's just like one of the, and there's also this. You also might be gorgeous.
Be shiny, and internally we'll feel just a different level of relaxation and joy
Yeah.
and pleasure in existing. The birds are, the song of the bird is clearer and the colors are brighter and food is juicier and like just life is juicier.
Yeah. It seems like an ideal time to maybe talk about the tantra, the poison and the antidote.
Mm. So yeah, so there's a classic, thank you. It's a classic image, even the symbol of the medical industry, of course, is snakes around a pole. That's where that comes from. So, in many medicine traditions, the snake is the healer archetype or totem. So the idea there is that often the antidote comes from the venom itself. And therefore, the thing that everybody thinks is the problem is, in fact, the unconscious or shadowy version of it becomes the problem, but not the thing itself, which in this case is power. The giving and the receiving and the wielding and the experiencing and the receiving of power. Power is simply the ability to achieve an end. The positive or the negative comes in terms of what is the intended end. And in a tantric formulation, the intended end of dominance and submission is actually love. And it might seem on the outside looking in for a lot of people, that's spanking or whatever, or calling names or costumes or not costumes or whatever, and various things that may on the surface not look particularly loving. And if they're done non-consensually and unconsciously, as we're talking about, they are definitely not loving
Yeah.
society-wise or traditionally or conventionally. But there's actually a different intended aim here, which actually could be safety to become primally wild with each other. And the safety is as important as the primal wildness. And it's the combination of those two that creates erotic charge. People want the erotic charge, obviously. There's billion-dollar industries built off trying to either extract it or get people into it or whatever. There's huge religions that have spent thousands of years trying to suppress it. There's political movements that try to harness it and co-opt it and control it for its own ends. Clearly, there's juice here. Why else would everybody be trying to get their piece of the pie if not? But where you very rarely see it is that charge is there for an intended aim of somebody's own sovereign empowerment, not for coercion, not for control, not for repression, not to serve some other political agenda or religious agenda or spiritual agenda or whatever. But what if the intended aim, what if the antidote is we actually go into it, but with a different form of consciousness, and then it becomes play? Then it really is rooted in playfulness and curiosity and safety and care, and then it can get wild within the bounds of safety.
Yeah. Do you think there's anybody that actually should not get curious and explore the potential of BDSM as something that they want to interact with? Is there anybody that's like, no, no, yeah, that background, you should never go there?
Well, I would say I would never probably say never in anybody's life over the course of their journey, but if we're saying like maybe not now
Right.
or maybe not for a while, if somebody really doesn't yet have an ability to be in touch with their body and their sensation and their feelings,
Yeah.
yeah, any form of whether it's polarity work, tantra, whether it has BDSM dynamics, it's definitely kicking it up a few notches for sure.
Mhm.
It's definitely turning up the spice level. So if there's challenges of maintaining association, emotionally, regulation, embodied, regulated state, emotionally, somatically, if there's like radical shutdown, I would want to start first by just like, can you feel sad? Can you feel happy? Can you feel your anger? Can you feel sorrow or disgust or envy? Just like foundational human emotion kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Can a person recognize the distinction between feeling numb versus feeling um, pleasure versus feeling like intense or visceral sensation that might sting or be painful? Yeah, if that's not there, no, don't jump in the deep end if you can't swim in the kiddie pool.
Totally. And that's the thing. There is a kiddie pool where you can work with feathers or scratching skin or, even just like parts of like use your own hand on your own body and like notice if you can experience like what it feels like to squeeze and to be contained and then to release it and then, to have a relationship with your body. So there's a tremendous amount of dissociation because of sexual trauma or because of experiences where you've been conditioned not to feel and to listen to your body for a long time. It can be really confusing. And I think some of the other ones would be, in mental conditions where you don't understand where your boundaries are or your ability to advocate for your boundaries, well, then you would start there. You would just start with like practicing with participating in the kiddie pool with boundaries. And like that can be an amazing thing. I've never been able to say no to my boss when they asked me to work late. All right, let's play that out a little bit. What could that look like, right? I've never been able to say no to my son when he wants to keep playing video games and I've told him not to, and then he just gets mad at me. Okay, these are great areas to actually work with where the nervous system's shutting down because it's not like anybody's done anything wrong in that scenario. It has to do with the nervous system collapse. And what we're talking about in this is like there's opportunities to actually make the nervous system way more robust in its ability to be either on or receiving, which is still on. It's
But receptive
on and receptive. Yeah.
versus on and directive.
Yeah.
But it's a
So,
different kind of directive than, and so in terms of other things about like flags that wouldn't be, again, back to kinds of things we were saying. It's like, yeah, somebody's looking for like, oh, I want to be in charge and, get mine. And
right.
no, like this is not that. So,
This is not that.
this is not that.
Yeah.
So no, that's not welcome in it. Like if somebody has it, we'll all have conditioning. It's important to go like, whoops, where did that come from?
Mm-hmm.
Whoopsie.
Yep.
There's that was a hairball that just the fur ball just came up like
Yeah.
whoop whoop. And then that becomes part of the like it's okay because we've all been conditioned away from really sovereign consensual forms of relating to each other. So as long as someone has the like self-awareness and they have the empathy and they have the genuine desire to say, whoops, that was some conditioning, not, oh my God, what's wrong with me? I'm so
Right.
terrible. I'm the most guilt-ridden being of all time. No, but just, oops, that was a hairball. And okay, what do we do about that?
Yeah.
If they're willing to take that kind of level of agency and responsibility, then yeah. And again, just call it like BDSM. I know everybody immediately goes like, "Oh my God, it's going to be like naked, full on sex all the way, like day one."
Yeah.
No, actually, there's all kinds of zones because you're going slowly and actually looking for what consent is and actually touching in to your own energy, touching into if it's first with self practice and then eventually if there's a partner practice, like actually slowing down and listening. Everyone is just so rushing through the sexual dynamic. You know, you see the numbers of like how long it actually lasts on average. It's a very short number. Um, so much possibility opens here when we actually are just like, what happens if we become playful and curious? If we're only really interested in just growing in intimacy and exploring and having pleasure and love and connection, that there's a lot that can be way more intimate with clothes on, emotionally and energetically, than a lot of people who are having mechanical, dissociated, intercourse.
Yep.
So a whole possibility and spectrum of experience opens up, and we're looking to bring aliveness and feeling back to kissing, to eye gazing, to hand holding, to cuddling, to massage, to touch, to all kinds of manner of experience, and in particular to build tension when we're looking at it from the lens of the yin or the sub, to let them actually go into experience of their body actually going into really deep arousal before any possibilities of like deeper penetration or whatever it might be, however it might show up depending on the persons involved. A lot of people who would want to experience submission, whatever their orientation, whatever their gender, they probably have not, or very rarely, if ever, had the experience of being completely held just to actually go through what it is for their body to enter full arousal.
Yeah.
Lovingly, safely, without any agenda or push or force or and that itself is a whole other experience, much less to then go somewhere with that. It's the next level, but
Yeah.
that itself can be profoundly fulfilling and wholesome and healing.
Mhm.
And again, it's one of these until someone's really had the experience, they really don't know the possibilities that are available in terms of the ecstatic pleasure that any human body that's consenting and safe and adult, and if they're brought through it, like the level of sensual, erotic, and sensual pleasure that the human body is capable of is off the charts.
Yeah, I really feel like people have no idea what's possible because we've been kind of been fed gruel for a long time. And like,
Because there's all the negative versions of the power, and then
yeah,
there's all the like, okay, we're all going to be good here, and we're all
yeah,
going to be empathetic and compassionate because we don't want to do all the bad stuff, which is
yeah,
great and totally understandable. We don't want to do the bad stuff. But then it gets kind of just flat. Like
bland.
the the juice is like we actually do like power. We actually do like the spice. We actually do like there's some desire for fire and mystery, and then both safe but a little bit of edge
Yeah,
of whatever variety. And some people's edge is going to be in different places than others, sure, of course. But that's kind of the Buster Perel thing. It's like eh, people want simultaneously familiarity, safety, reliability, but they also want mystery, otherness, the exotic, and the new. And normally those are seen to be going in separate directions from each other. So people have been together for a long time and they've got all the safety, but all the fire's gone out. And then there's, somebody else over here is like, ooh, and then that could lead to people getting really hurt and betrayed
yeah,
or people feeling really guilty or just suppressing that kind of desire. And instead, in this approach, we're saying like the more safety there is, the more otherness and wildness and primalness
yes,
And fire you can actually get into.
Yeah, part one is build your container. Yeah, container for safety, container for self, container for magic. Well, this was lovely. Is there anything else that you want to, anything come to mind? I'll take a quick glance at my notes.
Just, I think, to reiterate a point for me is this, it's one thing and it's unnecessary, but it doesn't take it far enough. It's like it's one thing to critique all the conventional problems around problematic power because they are there, they are real, and the critiques are valid. And that doesn't automatically offer a tantric option of saying, but really, let's get real. The reason this keeps happening in the unconscious way is there's some juice there. And could we take the, can we take the venom and
Yeah,
not have it be poison?
yeah,
And could we put it through the crucible and could it come out the other end
yeah.
as antidote, as medicine? That's the idea.
That's the
Some will say no, no way, no way in hell, never. That's their perspective.
100%.
Given everything, I can sympathize. I don't agree, but I can sympathize. My experience is there is an otherwise taboo hidden light in all of this that we need to be very conscientious. It's admittedly, I don't want to say like it's super dangerous. It's not super risky or dangerous, but it's like there's enough for it to be transformational. We got to get serious and real that we're not just, it's fire. You know, you can use, warm your home, cook your food, or burn the place down if you're not careful. So don't blame the fire.
Yeah,
The fire is just the fire. It's not the fire's fault if you misuse it and get scorched. That's not on the fire. Like, that's on the wielder of the fire. So that's why it's important to go really, really slowly and safely. But there is a fire there that is profoundly initiatory for those who feel drawn to it.
and the idea is that we are inviting, if you have questions, if you have critiques, if you have the elements where you've got some concerns, that's great. Use your discernment. We want to hear about it. And so that's also the invitation is let's hear it.
And I think we're really emphasizing the internal alchemy and transformation. And I hope that's really come across. Not just another, like, here's a bunch of new techniques and tips and tricks and things you can do. Like, no.
10 steps to BDSM,
No, it's
transformational
not
BDSM.
BDSM for dummies. Like, no,
Yeah,
it's not
yeah,
that. It's the whole apparatus from whence one could participate in polarity, particularly polarity where there's some degree of power entrustment. That requires a real personal transformational journey and into our hearts, into intimacy, into places that are tender, into places of our radiance and our innocence and our glory and our power and all of it. And just truthfully, like if you're doing it right, there's a lot of pleasure along the way. And as humans, transformationally, we can spend all the time saying we should be more disciplined and we should all, do the right thing. And, of course, and here's all the negative patterns that we all need to outgrow. And, but let's get real. Like the thing that actually draws people is like radiance and allure and bliss. And then in that, you recognize, oh, okay, there's a bunch of stuff here that I got to work on so that I can be more attuned to the goodness of life, to the benevolence and the pleasure of life.
yeah, indeed. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, everybody.